What up, my friends? Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're taking a hop back in history, and we're going back to a time where people had to get incredibly creative on an incredibly tight budget to get dinner on the table. I'm gonna be sharing 3 recipes with you that demonstrate the ultimate resourcefulness of the people in the 1930s. We're gonna be making Hoover Stew, a no yeast bread, and Wacky Cake. Now, the Hoover Stew, I just want to tell you, I had to look up and find out why it was called Hoover Stew. I had a feeling it was because of the president at the time, and sure enough, I was right. But not for the reasons why you'd think. It wasn't named after him as a positive thing. There were actually several things that people would name after Hoover as a point of sarcasm because they blamed him for the Great Depression. Because of the fact that they were all having to work on such a budget, they honored him by naming a stew after him. It was actually used in a lot of soup kitchens and home kitchens because it was a great way to stretch the ingredients that you had on hand. So I'm excited to share that one with you because it's a comfort meal that you can do on an extreme budget. And then I love the fact that we get to have some hearty bread to go along with it, as well as a dessert, because desserts were a luxury, but they got incredibly creative with the Wacky Cake and made it work even without having eggs, milk, or butter. I figured before we pop into the video, I would just share with you the top 10 things that were the hardest to come by during the Great Depression. So in case you want to challenge yourself to do a little Great Depression cooking, these are the things that you would have to do without. The first thing was meat. Now, in one of these recipes, they did use hot dogs or sausage because those were relatively easy to come by, but other meats were incredibly difficult to get, so most of the time they had to replace beans. Butter was another one that a lot of people didn't have, so you just had to do without. Sugar was another one, and it's kind of funny because you'll see in one of the recipes in this video, I end up substituting molasses for sugar because during the Depression, they wouldn't have spent money on sugar, or in some cases couldn't even get it because it was rationed. But now I actually priced it out, and molasses costs more than sugar. Coffee was another one people had to go without, so they got really creative, and a lot of people would use chicory root instead to get that coffee flavor. Fresh fruits were really hard to come by, so a lot of times they would use dried fruits or canned fruits, but there was not as much of an inventory of canned fruits as there are today, so they really had to do without fruits in most situations. Dairy products of any kind and eggs were also incredibly hard to come by, so those were things that they had to find substitutions for as well. This one would break my heart. Chocolate was incredibly hard to come by, so in this video we are making a chocolate cake, and I'm showing you how they did it during the Great Depression. They used cocoa powder, and they would use a very small amount and try and stretch it out so they could get the luxury of having chocolate without the price tag that came with it. Another one that they did without is store-bought breads. So a lot of people started getting very creative and making their own bread, but yeast was also hard to come by, so they had to start making no yeast bread, and that's one of the things we take on in this video. And then last but not least, this probably wouldn't be a surprise, but seafood was really hard to come by, especially in areas that were not next to the coast. Now, before we hop into the video, I'm gonna give you the price breakdown on each of these dishes. This is based on a Kroger store here in Jacksonville, Florida. So obviously your area may be a little bit different. I honestly bet if I had done Aldi or Walmart for this, it would be even cheaper. To make this entire menu, I was completely shocked at the price, and I'm gonna give you the breakdown per dish. So the total for all 3 items was $10.21. The Hoover Stew recipe was only $5.76 worth of ingredients, and they were all ingredients I already had inside my house. The best part about that number that I'm giving you, $5.76, that recipe easily would serve 10 people. We had so much for leftovers that we're probably going to be freezing a lot of it because John and I simply can't get through it. Next up, you guys are going to pass out. The bread that we make in this video, I cut it into 8 slices. You could probably stretch it to 10 as well to go with the soup. It cost me under $1 to make. It was 84 cents worth of ingredients. And again, it was all ingredients I had in the house, and there's only 5 ingredients that go into it. And then last but not least, we have the Wacky Cake. That was only $3.61. I would say that easily would serve 10 to 12 people, easily. And that number that I'm giving you, the $10.21 for the entire thing, the best news is it would be even cheaper because in the Wacky Cake alone, the molasses cost $2.25. That's more than half of the entire cake's cost. Had I switched it over to sugar instead, it would have only been 73 cents. So it's really funny that during the Great Depression, the molasses is what people would turn to because sugar was too expensive and too hard to come by. And now we're in a situation where the molasses is costing like triple what the sugar would cost in 2025. So you would be well under $10 if you switch from molasses to sugar. Now, I know a lot of us have either parents or grandparents that grew up during that era. So if you have a recipe that's been in your family from that time frame that you know that they leaned on, please leave it down below, because I'm just absolutely fascinated by how creative they got on the budgets that they had then, and they still found a way to make nutritious, wholesome meals for their families. So if you have any to share, please leave them down below, because not only will I benefit from hearing about the recipes, but anybody else who reads the comments will as well. If you happen to be new here, hi, how are you? My name is Kate. I never say my name here. Someone pointed it out and I'm taking this opportunity to start doing it. My name is Kate. Over here, I share a lot of videos like this where I try to do recipe inspiration. I specifically try to go with balanced, nutritious meals on a budget. And I also share haul videos. So if you like to see what's new at Costco, Trader Joe's, Sam's Club, I have plenty of those videos on my channel for you to check out. And if you enjoy the vibe while you're here, I would love it if you'd subscribe. Without further ado, let's go back in time and check out those recipes. Hey friends. We are going to make some bread, and this could not be easier. There are 5 ingredients in this, and you don't even need to let it rise. I am gonna just let it sit on the counter for a little while, but there's no yeast in it. So we're doing 2 cups of all-purpose flour. We're doing a tablespoon of baking powder. Yeast was something that was apparently hard to come by during the Depression, so they made it work with baking powder instead. And then we're gonna do a teaspoon of salt. I'm using pink Himalayan salt, but you would obviously just use whatever your favorite salt is. We're gonna go ahead and stir the dry ingredients together. Now, I have a KitchenAid mixer that normally when I bake, I use it for that, but we're obviously going Depression time. They probably didn't have a mixer, so we're just using our phalanges, our biceps, a bowl, and a wooden spoon. I feel like a wooden spoon would have been a vibe back then. Okay, now the other thing is, if you have sugar, and if they had sugar back then, you would use sugar. But we're pretending like we don't have that, so we're gonna use a tablespoon of molasses instead, and I'm just eyeballing that, because I am a rebel. So that's gonna be the substitute for our sweetener. And then we have a cup of water, and I just got room temperature water. I felt like that made sense for bread. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna mix. Okay, now that I've mixed it a little bit, I'm gonna just use my hands to knead it. It's definitely a very shaggy consistency compared to what I'm used to, so I'm interested to see what this turns out like. I'm gonna grab the loaf pan. All right, now I have a loaf pan that I greased, but back then they didn't have oil and butter a lot of the times, so you could just use parchment paper or just do your best, put some extra flour down, I guess. But we're gonna stick this in this loaf pan, and we are going to, I'm just gonna set it back on the counter for the next 5 or 10 minutes while I get started on the soup. I have my oven preheated to 375 degrees, so we will get that in the oven for about 25 minutes, then check on it, and then see if we need to like rotate or anything, and go up to 30 minutes until it's golden brown and cooked all the way through. I'm definitely interested to see how this turns out, because this is very sticky, very different from the bread dough I'm used to working with, but it smells good, so we'll see. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get the bread in the oven now. So that's gonna go for 25 minutes, and then I'm gonna check it. All right, next up, I'm gonna start on the cake, because I am currently boiling some water to make some pasta. So we need 1.5 cups of flour. And I know baking's supposed to be precise, but this is called a wacky cake, so I have a feeling we can kind of go a little off the rails if we need to. We need 3 tablespoons of cocoa powder. So chocolate was super hard to come by during the Depression, but cocoa powder was apparently available. So a lot of people use cocoa powder to kind of stretch their sweet treats, if you will. We're doing a teaspoon of baking soda, and we're doing 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And again, I'm using the pink Himalayan salt. Now that is it for the dry ingredients, so I'm gonna stir those together. And again, I have a KitchenAid mixer, but I just want to try and be as authentic as possible with this recipe. So I'm just mixing it with my biceps and a wooden spoon in a mixing bowl. That looks good. Now, if you wanted to, you could do a cup of sugar here. But again, back then they would not have really had sugar as an option. So instead, we are going, again, the molasses route, which is awesome because I bought molasses for a recipe and didn't really know what I was gonna do with it. And I got a lot of really great suggestions, and I'm probably gonna start actually making some of them because they sounded really good. We're doing a 3/4 cup amount of molasses, and I'm just kind of eyeballing. This is a full cup here, so I'm just going to what I assume is around 3/4. But anyways, I got a lot of really great ideas for how to use molasses that I'll definitely incorporate. I definitely want to try and make some like gingerbread cookies at some point. I've never made those from scratch. And I remember somebody mentioned just putting it on toast or something. Like they just like straight up ate it. I don't know. I've never really like experimented with molasses much, so I almost wonder too if it would make like a really cool latte, like if you did some type of a molasses with latte situation. Okay, so we did a 3/4 cup of molasses in lieu of a cup of sugar. I am gonna add just like a tablespoon equivalent of honey to sweeten it, but honey and sugar were both hard to come by back then, so they would have just stopped at the molasses, but I'm just adding the honey for me. We are gonna do a splash, AKA a teaspoon of white vinegar. That's good. And then we're gonna do 5 tablespoons of oil, and we're gonna do 1/2 cup of water. And again, I did kind of like a room temperature water, and we are just gonna go ahead and stir. Now, if you're making this today and you have vanilla extract on hand, adding it would be a great idea. I'm just gonna try and keep it as legitimate as possible, so we're not gonna add the vanilla extract because that would have been a luxury that most would not have had back during the Depression. So no vanilla extract for me, but if you have it, go ahead and pop it in there. This definitely has a unique scent to it because of the molasses, so I will be interested to see how this goes. The texture looks really great. It looks very like silky. Now, another thing that I read was that people used dried fruits a lot when they would bake this cake. So if you had like raisins or dates on hand or something, you could add that to give it an extra element. I'm just gonna go with this, the straight up chocolate cake, because I am just too interested to find out how this comes out just the way it is. Okay, I greased my, it's like a 7 by 11 baking dish, I would guess. You could use an 8 by 8 or like a round cake one. I greased it, but back then they might not have had access to oil or butter, so they might have used parchment paper instead, but I just went with a cooking spray. And I'm confident they would have tried to get every last bit of that goodness. We are getting this into a 375-degree oven. We're gonna check it at the 25-minute mark and see how it's doing. And then once the bread is done, I might end up reducing the heat to 350 and then see what that does. All right, now for the soup, I got started by boiling up some elbow pasta. I'm gonna go ahead and get this drained and set on the side, and then we're gonna use the same stock pot to make the soup itself. Okay, so we've got the stock pot that we use to make that pasta. I'm going to be putting in a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. And then I'm gonna go get some water to rinse this out, so waste not, want not. Okay, now I'm gonna pour in the water that cleaned out that jar. And then I have a container of homemade turkey stock that I'm putting in there. But if they didn't have homemade stock back in the day, it would have just been water, which would have been fine. But that's what I've got, so I'm tossing it in. And I skimmed off most of the fat from the turkey stock. You can tell it was frozen, this will melt down. But I did leave a little bit in just to give it some extra content. But we're gonna stir this together and let this melt down a little. Okay, the bread is done. So this is what it looks like. Pretty rustic, if you ask me, but hopefully it tastes delicious. And the cake is definitely still pretty gooey. I'm gonna turn the heat down though. I'm going to turn the heat down to 350 on the cake just to be safe. And we got this looking pretty good over here. Now, dried herbs might have been a luxury back then, but we are gonna go with some dried herbs because in cases they did have it. So I'm just gonna do about a tablespoon of it. I went with a Mediterranean blend, but like a Italian blend would be great. And then we're gonna hit it with some salt and pepper. Okay, now I'm gonna be tossing in a cup of mixed vegetables. So this would have been something they probably would have had canned. I have frozen. But it's just a mixture of peas, carrots, corn, and green bean. I'm actually gonna do 2 cups because a can would probably be 15 ounces. So I think 2 cups is more comparable. Next, we're gonna give it some beans. So I did grate northern beans, but it would just be a matter of whatever you have on hand. And then last but not least, you would be going in with hot dogs back during the Depression days. But we don't regularly eat hot dogs, so instead I'm just going with some chicken sausage that I have. These are technically breakfast chicken sausage, but we're just making it work over here. Back during the Depression, hot dogs even would have been a luxury that they may not have had. So doubling up on beans or just doing beans in general would have been something they'd do to get the protein level. So that looks absolutely beautiful.
Oh, that looks good.
Yeah. Friends, we have transported to the 1930s.
I mean, what time to be alive.
I wouldn't mind visiting. I probably wouldn't want to stay.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good. This is Hoover Stew, John. You have no idea what's going on.
Hoover Stew.
Hoover Stew.
Why is it named Hoover Stew?
I don't know. I probably told them in the intro because I'm going to do the research when I do the intro.
Gotcha.
I have a whole list of historical facts to share. Did I retain any of it when I looked it up? Not at all.
Good.
But I will be sharing it because I love diving into history, and this is like my excuse to geek out. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
Not as much as I love it.
No, John is like even more of a dork than me. Listen, we also have some no yeast, no rise, Great Depression era bread to dip in the soupy soups.
I'm here for it.
And then we'll finish it off with some chocolate cake that is currently cooling. I would like to take a bite of the bread.
I mean, the bread looks good.
It does. It looks good. Why do people use yeast?
That's good bread.
It looks rough. Like, it looks really rough, so I'm guessing that's why people, like, I wouldn't imagine people would buy this if it was served at a restaurant.
I would.
I would eat that at a restaurant.
That's fantastic.
I was really expecting to go into this and being like we need to like lower our standards, you know, and like kind of scale it a little bit. But that's really good bread. Okay, now I want to try.
What is it? It reminds me of something.
It does. It reminds me of something too. It's almost like a biscuit.
It's almost like your sourdough bread, not sourdough.
Yeah, no. The Dutch oven bread. You know that crusty Dutch oven bread?
That's what it reminds me
But
of.
actually, I almost like this a little better because I like that this has more of like a... People hate the word. It's moist. Sorry, everyone. Let's try the stew. Now, we don't really keep hot dogs on hand, but they would have used hot dogs in this, or I don't know if Spam was around back then, but Spam would be another alternative.
When did Spam come out? I feel like that's not that old.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, I don't think Spam was there back then. I'm going in on the Hoover Stew.
The Hoover Stew. I feel like this is a good... Is there marinara?
No, it's crushed tomatoes.
Oh. Peas. I love peas.
Why put everything else in soup? I put onion in soup, garlic, bell pepper. All of those things were not put in the soup.
This is fantastic.
It's like a comforting like tomato soup.
Yes.
But it's like almost like a minestrone soup.
Oh, that's what it's like.
You know what I mean? Like
it's like a minestrone soup.
It's like a fast action minestrone soup.
Fast action coming at you.
This is going completely different than I expected it to.
Really?
Yeah, because I don't know. I was thinking like, I do a lot of budget meals and I try to prove that budget meals don't mean that you have to lack flavor. But this one is like extreme budget meals. This is like bare bones, extreme budget. But apparently, even then, we can prove that you do not need to sacrifice flavor.
Yeah, I feel like it.
And it made so much,
good.
John. Do you see the amount of food we have over there? And this is perfect because we're supposed to have snow tomorrow in Florida. Excuse me. Excuse me, did I move and I forgot? Because I could have sworn I lived in Florida and I thought it was illegal for snow to show up. That's what I thought. I'm not happy about this. The soup is perfect for this vibe.
Yeah, 30, well, feels like 20 out.
Yes.
Soup.
The thing says tomorrow at one point it's going to be feels like 19.
Oh, no.
Ugh. Like once you dip down into those teens, that's gross. I was going to say something else. Oh, the other thing with this vibe is that one of my books released, Onyx Storm.
Ooh.
If anybody out there is into romantasy. I've never really been into romantasy until I read
Wait,
Fourth
is
Wing.
that what it's called, a romantasy?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's romance and fantasy mashed up.
It's more of a fantasy with unnecessary
With romance. Yeah, the romance, honestly. And I'm a romance reader, okay? But it's just a little unnecessary.
It is a great.
We got off topic as
It's
usual.
fantastic.
But now we have the soup, we have the book, we have the bread.
Listen,
that's a vibe.
We know what's happening tomorrow.
We know what's happening tomorrow. We are now gonna go ahead and slice up the cake and then give that a try. I just informed John that there's no sugar in this cake. So there's no eggs, no butter, no sugar, no milk. Because back then, those were the things that they couldn't get. They were like in the top 10 things that they couldn't have access to. Couldn't have access to, but you know what I'm saying. Limited access or no access whatsoever.
Here we are at the beginning of 2025.
And those
eggs are hard to come by.
So this is kind of perfect timing. If you want to make an eggless cake, here you go. No sugar, molasses instead. Little bit of honey, but the honey is optional. If you want to just use the molasses as your sugar substitute, you can. So I'm telling you right now, the texture of this
I mean, it looks
is
good.
shocking.
It looks like a good chocolate cake.
Yeah, because I thought this was going to be like a brownie the way that the batter was, but instead it came out like a cake. So I'm interested. I'm hooked in. I'm ready to see what the season finale says about this cake.
Oh yeah, it's like fluffy like a cake.
It's very fluffy. It's definitely different. It's not sweet.
It's not sweet, but it's like a cocoa-y, like...
Yeah.
It's good.
You know what the thing I think is that we've been trained to have super sweet chocolate cake. And this would be like more of like a pure chocolate cake.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody who doesn't like sweet, overly sweet things, this is perfect for you.
It's like light and airy, and I feel like that's like a great like little treat dessert that's
Without
not going to
making-
make you feel heavy.
I agree. And what I love about it too is that if you did want to increase the sweetness, there's plenty of ways you could do it. You know, you could mix in some chocolate chips, some caramel chips, some peanut butter chips.
Put some frosting all over it.
You could put frosting all over it, or you could just drizzle peanut butter. Like if you have a little bit of peanut butter, melt a little peanut butter and drizzle that on there. That still wouldn't make it overly sweet.
Yeah.
But it would give it a little something. It's definitely a very, like the molasses makes it a unique flavor, but when I say unique, I was expecting to not love it because the smell of it, when I was mixing it together,
Really?
the smell of it almost, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't vinegary, and there's vinegar in that, but there was some very distinct smell that the molasses had that was making me a little nervous. We should rate things.
Okay.
Now, I will say I'm still gonna scale this a little bit because they are very basic, but
I'm not.
they wouldn't be something that I'd be ashamed to serve to a guest. I don't care. Okay, for the bread, I'm going like a soft 9.
I'm going a solid 8.
A solid 8.
Solid.
Okay, and then for the soup, I'm going, no, maybe the bread I'm doing 8.5, and the soup I'm doing 9.
Oh, okay. All right.
You know?
I like it.
It seriously is like if you got like a Progresso soup, like a minestrone soup. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like that's what it reminds me of.
Yep.
But like obviously better because you made it at your house.
Obviously.
Obviously. So 9 for the soup, 8.5 for the bread. What are you doing for soup?
Soup, I'm doing 8.5.
8.5. That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
For the chocolate cake, I'm probably gonna do a 7, but it's a solid 7.
I'm gonna do 6.5.
6.5. We like sweet stuff, so that's the
Yeah.
problem. That's the problem here. But if you are the type that wants like an alternative,
Yeah.
and you want like no fuss, because I think there was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 ingredients, if that, in that.
Yeah.
super
I
win.
mean, like, listen, if times get tough,
Or
that is a
even if
fantastic-
times don't get tough, honestly, if you just want to take like a little less of a hit to the grocery budget.
Also true.
You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I agree. If times get tough, this is something you could turn to.
This is fantastic.
And the best part is every single thing that you guys saw, I already had on hand. Or even if I didn't have the item on hand, I would have had another substitute.
Yeah.
That was the thing with the Depression era that I'm like fascinated by, is they made substitutions happen. And remember, they didn't have Google at their fingertips to figure these things out. So it's like they were like little scientists experimenting with different ingredients and then sharing it with one another.
That's a
you know?
great, that is a great statement.
Especially with baking. Like baking, you
Yeah.
have to be somewhat precise. So they had to have been like testing things out and then reporting back to one another and letting it spread. And that is fascinating to me because again, they didn't have Google, but they also didn't have cell phones. Most people didn't have televisions, radios, nothing. Like the fact that they were able to come up with these incredibly creative recipes is mind-blowing to me. And it's completely inspirational to me when you do need to try and make some cuts that you could turn to stuff like this. We're gonna get that feedback over to corporate. I had so much fun in this video. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it too.
I was like, I'm blown away.
I'm blown away because I walked into this thinking this was gonna be like subpar food, but helps you out on the budget.
They were eating good.
Yeah, they did a great job. If you know somebody that was alive during the Depression era, go give them a hug from us and give them a high five too. They deserve that.
High five.
They're my heroes. All right, well, I hope we delivered whatever you needed when you clicked on that thumbnail, and I hope you have a magical day. Bye.